Hi, everyone, and welcome to this call on collaboration and partnerships for COVID-19 response, aligning resources to better serve our communities. Thank you all for joining us. I'm handing it over to our President and CEO, Kathleen Enright.
Thank you so much, Daniela. And thanks so much, everyone, for joining this call. This is a great group of people who've decided to come join us for this conversation. And most of you dedicate your professional lives to helping others through nonprofit and philanthropic work. And I just want to say thank you for that dedication, particularly right now, for your focus on those folks who are most vulnerable and at highest risk. I also want to thank the rest of the council team, Brad, Manuela, Daniela. They made this possible under a very tight time frame, so thank you. We all know that broad scale issues, systemic issues like COVID-19 require a collaborative response. And so you've probably joined this call because you're looking for creative ways to collaborate so that you can better meet the urgent needs that you see right in front of you. Well, our hopes for this time together are to learn from a couple creative public-private partnerships and a couple philanthropic partnerships. These folks are leading by example in their local areas. We're also trying to understand both why these partnerships are important and what's different contextually given the circumstance of COVID-19. And finally, our speakers are going to highlight some strategies and practical insights that are coming up for them as they go about their work together. We're all watching this pandemic unfold, and it's day-by-day news that it's hard to digest. And we're taking steps that we hope make a difference, not only in our local communities, but around the world. But in addition to the urgency of this immediate response, more community leaders are thinking through how to respond to what will be the long tail of this pandemic. This is including things like the ramifications of unprecedented spike in unemployment, the consequences of the disproportionate toll this crisis is taking on communities of color and Native communities, which is further exacerbating the long-standing inequities that exist. It's also possibly weakening our civil society and our social safety net as nonprofits do even more with the razor-thin margins that they've long been operating with. So in the midst of this bracing set of facts, the strong leadership and values-based collaborations that are represented on this call give me a great deal of hope. I'm very pleased to be joined by Tonio Whelan, the newly appointed president and CEO of the Greater Washington Community Foundation. You've been with the foundation for several years, Tonio, but in this role more recently, so thank you so much for being with us. And we've also got Rosie Allen Herring. She's the president and CEO of the United Way of the National Capital Area, a longtime civic and philanthropic leader here in the district where the council is located and where I live. So thank you for your leadership on behalf of our community. Next, we have Peter Lawhern, who is the president and CEO of the Conrad H. Hilton Foundation in California. I'm proud to say that Peter is one of the newest members of the Council on Foundations Board of Directors. So Peter, thank you for being here. And finally, we've got Matt Johnson. Matt apparently has been recently tapped again for public service. He has previously been in that role, but as COVID unfolded, we've learned that he was tapped by the mayor to be the chief of the COVID-19 philanthropic and private sector community engagement for the city of Los Angeles. Matt is, has been a long-serving public servant, but also knows our nonprofit sector well, having served both with the LA Urban League and Boys and Girls Clubs. Thanks for being here, Matt.
Thank you.
So we're going to start talking about the partnership here in DC, and Rosie and Tonio will just share with us how this unfolded and what they've been doing. So I'll start with you, Rosie. Why don't you tell us a bit more about your partnership?
Well, thank you for having us, and it's absolutely a joy to be with you today and to be with all of your listeners. I have the pleasure of partnering with Tonio Whelan, who is the Greater Washington Community Foundation's newest CEO. And for us at United Way, partnerships is really what we do. And as we've shared over the last year, our partnership is not just because of COVID. It's now who we are and how we operate on a day-to-day basis. The fact that we're in a crisis because we had the relationship just allowed us to bring it together quicker, sooner, and faster. Last year, during the federal government shutdown for 35 days, we had an opportunity to bring a lot of the nonprofit sector as well as the funding community together. And to Tonia's point, earlier, we've been able to continue that conversation. And now that we're in the COVID crisis, we've been able to convene everyone around that partnership to make certain that we collectively cover the community. No one entity has all the answers, but together we do.
Tonya, why don't you go ahead and fill in your perspective?
Sure, to Rosie's point, and thank you for having us, Kathleen, and for the opportunity to highlight our relationship. 2019 federal government shutdown, Rosie and I worked really closely together with the broader philanthropic and nonprofit community. And following that crisis, because it was a crisis, not of this proportion, but it was a crisis, we spent time together planning for what we imagined would be the next crisis. I don't think we had any idea that it would be anything like this, but we spent time with our peers in philanthropy thinking through how we would continue to work together and act together, which made some of the decisions that we've come to over the last 1 month a lot more sort of just easier to follow and to engage with and through. So Rosie and I co-host a call every Friday with our peers in philanthropy. We have for the last, this will be the fourth Friday tomorrow for the last month, just to make sure that we are all hearing from our peers and partners in philanthropy, our partners in local government. We cover a very broad region of 3 states and several jurisdictions. And so we want to make sure that we are all understanding what's happening at both the federal, state, and local level to see how philanthropic resources can be used to fill gaps and for catalytic purposes. And so it has worked really, really well for us to stay joined at the hip, as we often say, through this period, so that we can continue to make sure that the community that we serve gets the resources that they need.
That's just beautiful. And it's amazing that you already had the trust built and the partnership built, that you could just activate it again. That must have saved a lot of time and energy. Well, one thing that it's often hard to navigate when you've got 2 storied community leadership organizations at the table here is how to navigate what are your best roles that you can each play. So Rosie, do you mind talking a little bit about that?
Sure. I think that we all recognize that we bring strengths to the table. And part of that collaboration, to Tonia's point, over the past year, we've had conversations about just that in terms of what we do well. And for us at Your United Way, we really are able to mobilize those nonprofits who are on the ground serving families every day, and being able to bridge that with the funding community to make certain that that there is efficiency and the way that the funding happens. We bring that strength to the table. Tonia has great strength, and that not only around assets, but also being that go-to organization, if you will, that most people would want to park funds. They bring funds to us, in one environment, and they bring funds to her in another environment, and we're able to bring those funds together to say, hey, who knows who's best, and being able to determine what those needs are, who has capacity, who's credible, and being able to bring that to the table in terms of what we're looking and seeking to do. And that's what we do well, and bringing those resources, those nonprofits, and those issues to the table. Tonia?
Yeah, I'll add to that we've also made some strategic decisions about what the Community Foundation will likely not focus on, and leaning in on the United Way's experience on what they will focus on. So, for example, we've made a decision not to lean in on food distribution efforts, but we know that United Way can lead the way for us when it comes to thinking through who our partner food banks should be and how we direct those resources. Our resources, our collective resources, and I'll mention that we have partnered through our COVID response fund with over 22 philanthropic organizations and lots of individual donors who contributed to the fund And we're making joint decisions around how those resources are being used. So we're focusing in on low-income hourly wage workers, on medical access for communities who've not historically had access to medical access to healthcare
resources.
Resources. Thank you for that word, Rosie. We've been very strategic about the priority populations and the issue areas, working alongside our various peers in philanthropy, and leaning in and depending on United Way to provide strategic insights on things like food access, for example.
Well, Tonio, when you mentioned your Friday calls and how this table of philanthropists that you are coordinating together keeps expanding,
yes.
We know that funders have their opinions.
Absolutely.
Yes, they do.
We are all them, right? They are us.
That's right.
So I just wondered, how are you navigating? You said you're making collective decisions with this ever expanding table. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And I think the good thing is that we like each other, which makes all of this so much more easy. And we're really happy that we get to do something in this time of serious crisis. So there are about 22 funders around this steering committee table. And we really spent some time early on putting together the criteria for which we would make some decisions. And again, as much as we have clear criteria, we each have our own approaches to grant making. And it's interesting, we just made a decision around $1 million in grants that will go out by the end of this week, early next week, to nonprofits. And we made it as a joint table. Really, a 1.5-hour meeting turned into a 2.5-hour meeting because we really wanted to make sure that we were getting resources in the hands of people who need it most and now. And it meant that all of our biases, all of our individual organizational sort of priorities began to push through. And at the end of it, we came out with a slate of nonprofits that we're going to be funding that we're really proud of. We're going to do this is an evolving process.
Right.
And as federal and local and state resources come through, it means that we're having to shift how we think about the best, highest, and best use of philanthropic resources. But we're doing that together in a messy way, but in a very important way.
Absolutely.
That's beautiful. Rosie, did you want to add something else?
No, I was just going to say, what Tony is saying, and she's saying it nicely, we really do bring the best of who we are to the table. And that's what we love about it, because it really is a diversity of thought, of perspective. And we each bring that to the table to ensure that no one entity or no one source of our population is not being met. And the opportunity to be able to do that in a crisis, but recognizing we're all on the same team, says that we're really doing it the right way. Because if we were all left to our own devices, someone's not going to get covered. Someone's not going to get funded. Someone's not going to get the help that they need. But this way, we can feel at least a little bit better about ourselves, knowing that the issues are infinite, the resources are finite, and we have to make certain that as we continue to evolve, that our thinking and our resources also evolve with that as well, with the need.
Well, I can't wait to talk more about those lessons learned. Let me bring Peter and Matt into the conversation, and then we will get to that together. So Peter and Matt are both in the LA region, and Peter is represents one of many philanthropic institutions that are working with the mayor's office in this response. And so, Peter, let me start with you about how that relationship has evolved and what it means during this time of COVID.
Sure, and I'm thinking for all the 300 people who are on the call, this is the time when all that relationship building you've done over the years pays off. Because
Absolutely.
relationships and trust are very important in emergency responses. They allow for speed, for decisiveness, for risk-taking. And we've all needed to work a lot faster recently because of the public health emergency. So that this is the payoff for all that work. In LA, we have the wider philanthropic community has a long-term history of working with both the city and the county, especially on the area of homelessness over the last 10 or 15 years. Very collaborative philanthropic environment, frequent co-funding with one another. But I would say the environment is complex. It's a county of 10 million people, which is bigger than 40 of our states. It's a city of 4 million, but there are also 87 other cities in the county. The county has the formal public health lead, but the mayor has the most prominent leadership role. So all of this means there has to be very disciplined coordination, primarily between the city and the county, with everyone around them. And I would say the philanthropic community here has tried to play their role. We as well, like in Washington, we're meeting weekly, and we're trying to act as organized a way as we can for the benefit of the whole effort. I think I look at this as a classic multi-stakeholder partnership, even though it appeared only in the last 3 weeks, right? We all need to know what are our respective value adds, what are our respective roles, what are the superpowers, if you like, of everybody who is involved. The mayor his leadership has been incredible. He's been articulate, he's been clear, he's been reassuring, and he's helped people find ways that they can contribute. When we look at the whole of this effort, the County of LA has a $30 billion budget. The city has something like $10 billion. So philanthropic dollars are small in this context, but where can they be optimally used, and how can we play the most useful role? And we typically think in a situation of working with government, how can we be a bridge funder, and how can we be a niche funder? The bridge in the sense, how can we bring funding in before the larger government funding flows? And in this sense, that's also federal and state, and not just county and city. And I think we feel we got a lot of money out to help protect the homeless population in LA in the first week before other funding started to flow. The niche funding is what will likely not be funded by a government response, and how can we fill in there? And we came to Matt in his role with the mayor's office and said, you know, Hilton is typically a homelessness funder, but in this crisis, use our money in those places where you think you won't be reimbursed, or where you think that the other streams are not likely to touch. So be flexible. We talk a lot about convening, hard to do when we can't get face to face, but I think we should all think about our role in helping systems coordinate, particularly larger bureaucratic ones that aren't used to dancing together very well. And I think philanthropy as well should help everyone keep the eye on the longer term. We need all to be involved in immediate emergency response right now, but the issues we've been working on have not gone away in the midst of all of this, from climate to inequity to racial justice. When we come out of this, we're going to have to take a stock taking. We're going to have to admit that even though we've worked really hard, I think the best that we collectively deserve in our public health response is a B+, and in a lot of places probably less than that. How can we do better for the next time? Because this isn't our last rodeo. And we're also trying to keep the voices and interests of people with lived experience really top of mind, the most vulnerable. And again, I shout out to the city. I think they've done that in a really good way as well. As you know, we have 60,000 homeless people in Los Angeles, and it's a tremendous crisis for them. So we're all trying to pull together on that. One last thing. We commissioned in our global work a report on multi-stakeholder partnerships. It was really about how the planet is working on climate and global health challenges, but I think it's relevant to this domestic and even very local situations we find ourselves in. So hopefully COF can share that with the folks who are in the audience.
Yeah, we'd be glad to. We'll get all the resources back out to folks. Peter, one follow on to you really quickly, just because I know I was on a call with some LA funders right at the start of this. And so how are the folks who are experiencing homelessness in LA faring right now in COVID?
It's tough. And Matt may have the latest figures from the city, but you know, particularly the unsheltered homeless, and particularly those who are living in an encampment, the conditions are really not favorable in a situation like this. So the city and the county have been trying to move them to shelter. In fact, trying to make progress in the space of a month on something that had been years in the making. And I know a lot of the community is pulling together. Hotels are offering rooms for quarantine and for homeless people, but it's been hard. Matt probably has more detail.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very tough, sheltering in place when you don't have a permanent place.
Place
I
to
mean, that
shelter.
is not a thing.
Yeah.
Well, Matt, yeah, just hop on in.
Well, yeah, on that topic, obviously it's a huge challenge because the health risk um, to the unsheltered community when they're unhoused is quite significant. So we have made a sustained effort together with the county and with our philanthropic partners to really do as Peter said, in a month what we've been trying to do for years, and that's get people off the street. And we have had some significant success. We've converted a number of rec centers into temporary housing for the unsheltered. As you can imagine, that creates all sorts of. We've had plans in place for a disaster like a earthquake, but just because of social distancing, those plans you can't follow to the letter because you have to have far more space. A flip side of this crisis is there are a lot of unused hotel rooms. So we've been able to take advantage of that, and we're acquiring more and more hotel rooms by the day to put people in. But like everything, you try and find the silver lining with what you're doing, and this is, in my mind, not only getting an opportunity to get people off the street that we haven't been as successful at more recently, but also when you get them into these situations, you get them into these rec centers, you also have them in an environment where you can get them services that you may have had more difficulty getting to them previously.
Well, thank you for that. And so, Matt, your job, I can't even imagine. I think all of us feel like time is sort of a weird concept in this moment. It feels like 7 months have gone by, not a month or two. So tell me a little bit about this coordination role that you're in and how that's particularly playing out with Philanthropy.
Yeah, so I kind of uniquely have a fair amount of experience in the private business community, in the philanthropic community through volunteer work and serving on boards, and then also in the city, having served on Mayor Garcetti's transition team, and then a couple of prominent roles on the airport commission, and then running the police commission for 3 years. As this crisis was beginning to unfold, the mayor called me up and he said he really recognized early just really what was going to be required here. And he said, look, as a city, we're going to be called on to do things beyond which anyone has ever contemplated before. And we'll have resources. We'll have resources from the city. We'll have federal resources. We'll have state resources. But there are going to be gaps between what we can provide and what is necessary. And we're really going to need to have coordination and collaboration with the private sector and the philanthropic community on a scale that we've never done before. So he asked me to, drop what I was doing, which frankly wasn't that hard because my day job, there's not much going on. And also just recognizing this is one of those moments where if you have an opportunity to contribute, you want to step up to the plate.
Absolutely.
And so it's really been a kind of a remarkable 3.5 weeks, which has felt like 3.5 years. And it's really through great partnerships with folks like Peter and the Hilton Foundation. There have been collaborations and relationships that have been built up over a long period of time that are now being leaned on in ways that you didn't know that those, that work and time that you put in earlier, as Peter said, that trust that was built up. And we're asking people, everybody's operating outside of their comfort zone. So as Peter mentioned, they primarily work in the unsheltered homelessness space. But one of the areas where we saw a very significant need was providing a safety net for people that have lost their jobs. And we created a fund called the Angelino Fund. And Peter, when I first started talking to Peter, I was thinking like, okay, how would love him to his foundation to be supportive, and was thinking more in the homelessness space because they've done such an amazing job in that space. But Peter recognized, like, you know what, we want to participate where it's needed, and that's the kind of collaboration we've really seen across the community. Of we're not going to operate necessarily by the playbook we've always operated on. We're going to recognize this moment and we're going to step up as needed.
That's terrific. I'm sure you have an example that you love to give about a specific how something got done because of this collaboration,
Yeah.
be it to do with PPE or with something else.
I mean, the good news, I could give you 100, and the collaboration is super important, right? So twice a week, I have a standing call with 5 or 6 foundation heads and the county where we just talk about what is going on, what we're seeing. Every day, I have conversations with numerous foundation heads about what they're seeing, what they're doing in their individual organizations. Every day, I start my morning with a call with my counterparts on the county side. So I'll give you an example of something that came up today. So a week ago, I got a call from our public safety department saying they needed an emergency grant of like $150,000 for hotel rooms for victims of domestic violence. That really wasn't something we had contemplated, but as probably is no surprise to anybody on this panel or listening in, while crime overall is down because of the stay-at-home order, domestic violence and child abuse, sadly, are up significantly. And also because of the stay-at-home order, there's no shelters. Every place is absolutely full. So of course we were able to find the money for the 150. That was no problem. But then I was like, okay, but that's today. We're at the, even though our stay-at-home order is technically up April 19th, everyone knows it's probably more like June 1st. So what do the next 8 weeks, 10 weeks look like? And it's a multi-million dollar issue that we're going to have to solve. Like we don't have a choice. So I was talking to my counterpart on the county this morning, and they had a really good idea of how we could get some potential, I don't know, sure, but get some federal dollars. Because using the same argument that we are housing the unsheltered for, to maybe claw some of those federal dollars for shelter for the victims of domestic violence.
That's great. Gosh, and I know there's a scramble happening right now for nonprofits and small businesses to apply for the payroll protection program. And that's a hard thing to do that takes time and expertise. I'm sure that in both cities that we're talking about here, there are supports being put in place for nonprofits to do that. Well, so let's talk about a couple themes that have come up, and I just invite all of you to chime in. One of them is the disparity in the impact based on race, and a question actually came up right as before I asked this one about working with the undocumented. These are folks who aren't going to be able to take advantage of some of the federal government dollars that are going to come. So could you respond to either or both parts of that issue? Just pop on in, whoever wants to go first.
Well, I can tell you from a city perspective, we are incredibly focused on that. Obviously, the city of LA has a very large undocumented population. The city itself is majority people of color, I think about 70%. So we're looking at it from a health perspective, making sure that we're getting testing out as to the communities most at risk, making sure they get the proper medical care, but also then looking at the other long-term impacts, the job loss, which disproportionately impacts this community. The federal dollars through the CARE Act will not go to undocumented people. So the Angelino Fund, which I mentioned earlier, which is cash grants to individuals, we'll get cash grants to about 15,000 people. That will impact about 50,000 people. And our program is very specifically designed to capture those people that will be left out from the federal program. The PPP program, making sure that we're very concerned that the very small business owners, which are most likely going to be women and people of color, are not left out from those programs, that they have the access. And we know that if we don't put systems in place, and that is very much in partnership with our philanthropic partners, and we have regular meetings on that. If those systems aren't put in place by a combination of local government and philanthropy, those folks will 100% be left behind, and we can't afford to let that happen.
No. Tonia, you were going to pop in.
Absolutely. There's a quote that I saw today that says that systems produce predictable outcomes. And so we know that inequitable systems also produce inequitable outcomes. It's a good thing that many of our partners and peers in philanthropy have spent quite a bit of time thinking about racial equity and how do we apply a racial equity lens to our work generally before COVID-19, because we knew that this pandemic would disproportionately impact communities of color. And so we have been very, very thoughtful in prioritizing our response accordingly, making sure that resources get to low-wage workers, people who are experiencing homelessness, communities that we knew for sure would be disproportionate, frontline workers who would be disproportionately impacted, both in the crisis, and we're beginning to already to shift our thinking to and what about the recovery? And what are some of the systems changes that we've been able to push through so quickly in the last month that we might want to think about from a sustainability perspective, recognizing that low-wage workers didn't have access to healthcare pre-COVID-19. We're making it available to them now. And what about post-COVID-19? So we're really looking at what do we do now, but what is it that we're going to lean in on for a sustained amount of period so that communities of color, low-income communities generally, can have access to some of these benefits that we're prioritizing now. I appreciated some of the response because we've made some early investments in the homeless service system, just based on a number of the things that you're both pointing out. The need to have people who are in shelters quarantine, or to move to places where they can get the services that they need and not impact disproportionately others who they're in shared spaces with, has been a challenge for us. I mean, we're at capacity in our shelters now. We're really trying to spend more time talking and engaging with our partners in the hotel industry about opening up some of their spaces and trying to sort of let go of some of the stigma that's attached so that we can get services to people who need them most and now. The other thing that we've been prioritizing is getting, all of the stimulus resources are organizing and being set up for deployment. People need money now. So how can we get cash into the hands of people? Food, of course, yes, but also money so that they can get the things that they need, whether it's prescriptions filled or pay for the other things that we can't make decisions about, for them, but they need to make for themselves. So that has been really highly prioritized. I want to highlight two other really important partnerships. We've had an organization in the district to set up what's called the DC Equity Fund, and they've partnered with us at the Community Foundation to raise resources to provide access to Chromebooks and to broadband access, so that kids who are disconnected technologically can continue their schoolwork and to be able to participate in their education through the end of the school year. And we also had a developer to create a tenants fund. So it's a well-known developer in our region to set up a fund for his low-income tenants to be able to get cash assistance directly to them for non-rent needs. And I'm just really proud at how, again, our peers in philanthropy, but our corporate and other partners are stepping up to be able to respond generally, and really also thinking about the disproportionate impact on communities of color and low-income people in our region.
Kathleen, in the spirit of candor, I'd bring up a couple of things that we're struggling with. And I imagine a lot of people in the audience will nod about this. One is the state of our own grantees in the nonprofit community. All the resources that all of us have been able to put out there and make available, I think it's great, and it's not enough, right? And I think that They are eligible for the small business assistance, but in a lot of ways they're 20th, at the counter because they don't have a credit relationship with the bank. They've avoided loans, et cetera. And so I think our municipal partners, our Congress people, also Council on Foundations can really help make that known. If there's another 250 billion that's coming out in assistance, let's really try to make sure that there is a stream that gets to nonprofits. The second thing we're struggling with, or I could say we had a discussion with LA County the other day, they're interested in us setting up a PRI fund matched by the county that would help in enterprises and very small businesses that are not going to benefit from the CARES Act. And we're not used to working that fast on PRIs. I think we'll figure out how to do it, right? But often our due diligence is months long and more complicated than for our grants and stuff. And I think it's a step up moment for us to figure out how to do that well and how to do it in coordination, not only with one another, which we often don't do, but with large governmental agencies, right? And anybody on the call or in our network who has thoughts on that, I think they would be really useful.
We can take those through the Q&A box too. Advice for Peter on how to speed up his PRI process. I'm envisioning the world where all of these practices that we have come to because we care so much and we want to support our communities, that they become the new normal. So we're able to be more flexible, to forego some of our peculiarities about our own grant making in the interest of the community good. So Rosie, I saw you trying to get in right before. And you're still muted, lady.
All right, am I unmuted now?
Yeah.
All right, perfect. So no, it was really just to echo some of the thinking that Tonio shared that we've been talking through as well. One of the things that I think that makes us pretty unique here in Washington with the Community Foundation and United Way is that we both have emergency assistance funds, that we are both raising funds and dollars for, because there are different entities and certain parts of the community that we each have as our niche that we can go to and try to get it so that we can ensure that we get the best of all those worlds. But the question that you asked about the disparities in terms of what's there, and we're right, anything that has been systemic will continue to be, to be that way. And when we talk about homelessness here in this region, most people don't realize that so many of our people, at 83% of the people who are either at risk of or who are experiencing homelessness in the region actually get up and go to a job every day. And so most people don't realize that people are asset limited or income constrained, but they're employed. They actually go to work every day. And for us, we've been doing what we call Project Homeless Connect, which is a one-stop shop, one day where we actually bring everyone in and give them access to resources with one buddy where they're not passed around in terms of being able to access those resources. But now that we're in the crisis, we see that exacerbated. It's not just those who are in the District of Columbia alone, 53% of the deaths are attributed to African Americans. And we see what's happening, of course, as the pandemic continues to grow. We will see that exponentially happening in other cities and major urban areas as well. Chicago being the next sort of kind of pinnacle, if you will. And so when we look at that, as Tonio said, we've been working on equity also for probably about a year with a group of funders and those whom we know care. And we look forward to launching at some point in time in a very near future our racial equity effort in a summit that we'll have here in Washington. So again, the work continues. And for any of the listeners who are on this call, we really want them to understand we are responding in the crisis and in the moment. We will do that. But we also have to think beyond the crisis and making certain, and based on our estimations and all of our data collected, we're looking at an 18 to 24 month recovery. This is not everybody come back to normal, flip the switch and we're back in. And because of a lot of the systemic issues that are there, i.e. even though we're holding off on public policy issues around foreclosures and evictions and things of that nature, if people who are without wages they're not going to instantaneously be ready to be current on any debts that they have the moment that we quote unquote go back to work. We have to ramp up. What does that ramp up look like for many of our children who are outside of their school, where they're not getting day-to-day instruction? Many are finished for the school year for all intents and purposes, and we won't know what the real effect of this quote unquote distance learning will be until September, where many of our kids would have been out of a classroom for 6 months. And so when we think about what that means, we have a lot of work to do to anticipate what we think the fallout will be, but also to try to bring some thought leadership solutions to what those issues will be before we get there, so that while we're in the crisis, it's a two-pronged approach. We will manage for those basic needs that people need, but we have to think and have to come up with that beyond the crisis strategy that we believe is going to be necessary for the next 18 to 24 months for sure.
And I'm sure whatever strategy it is will be a collaborative one. It'll
Absolutely.
be one that involves all the partners you've been working with, the mayor's office and others. I think I know the mayor in DC has a fund that is hosted at the Community Foundation, right, Tonio?
Yes.
That's right.
So there's another connection here. Well, Peter launched us into a little bit about learning, something that he's still thinking about, struggling with. But I'm wondering if any of you have things that you want to share in the real-time learning, things you tried that maybe didn't go as you wanted, or things that are going to be a little bit more helpful the next time around. Does anyone want to start?
I'll just throw one thing out that we learned last year when we were during the federal government shutdown, because it was something that was unexpected, because it was one of those things where in Washington, you hear Congress go at it all the time. And then you know that the threat of the shutdown always exists. And then when it happened, we thought that it would be short-lived, and then it kept going on and on and on. And then it became, many of the federal government workers found themselves in need. So it was a new constituency that you're not used to traditionally seeing in need. Many of them were middle-income, federal government workers. So you have to be able to pivot and not assume that you know the population that's in need, because it can change on a moment's notice. That's one thing. And two, one thing I think we learned about ourselves as a community, we all care, and we care deeply, and we're all ready to go, generally at a moment's notice. But what we found is we were sort of kind of being duplicative, if you will. We were all funding the same organizations and all funding the same thing. And when we were able to sit back and say, oh, you funded them? Well, you funded them too. Oh, and then someone else is left out. And so what it did, it caused us to think about it strategically and to be able to collaborate and share, which is a part of that trust, that it's not about giving away your trade secret or your business model or anything of the sort. It's about making certain that we're not overloading any one particular area and shortchanging another. So it really just teaches us to don't think you always know your audience when it could change in a moment's notice. And as this goes on, we can see this pandemic is an equal opportunity crisis for everyone. There is no one particular area that this was targeted towards. Everyone is living through it, and it's affecting everyone. And then again, just think about how you can pivot more quickly to ensure that we're collaborating to make certain that we're being as effective as possible.
You make two important points there, Rosie. One of them is that, folks who already were good at accessing philanthropic capital are going to be the bigger winners in this case as well. And they may or may not be the organizations serving those populations that are most vulnerable. So I love that you're coordinating and you're trying to figure out how to drive those resources where they're most needed. I will hold my second point and let Tonio go.
No, I was just going to add a fine point on one of Rosie's mentions around sort of making sure that we're not being duplicative. We've put together a very low-tech Google Doc where we're being completely transparent about all of the grant funding that we're all doing, both together and parallel, so that we can be mindful about places in our community that are not being reached or touched, and we're sharing it with whoever wants access to it. I mean, it's low sophistication, but very, very effective in making sure that we have full coverage. One thing that Rosie reminds me every time we talk is that this is a marathon and not a sprint, and so as much as we're trying to do what we can to make sure that we are being responsive to the community right now, we also have to pace a bit. think about sort of recollect ourselves, get ourselves together, and then think about, okay, what we're going to need in phase 2 of this, and what will we need to do differently in phase 3, so that we can be far more strategic and impactful as we're thinking about sort of our next steps in our agenda for the future.
Matt, did you want to add something in? Well, I think that they're still trying to. There you go. We got you.
You know, I think 2 things I would say. One, I think the collaboration is I found to be really important, because you just don't know where you're going to get the next great idea from. And it's probably going to be from a source that you didn't expect. So the more conversations I have with people talking about what's going on, what they're seeing, just good things have been coming from that. And I totally agree. This is a marathon, and we have to be looking at the next 18 to 24 months. But the flip side is people are suffering right now, and I'm seeing it, and it's heartbreaking. And, you know, government and these agencies, we're not necessarily built to move quickly on this stuff. But I think really, I implore everyone, this is not a time to overthink things. It is, you may make some mistakes, you may break some things, but people are suffering and we have to move quickly. And I'm very proud, you know, we got $1.2 million in grocery gift cards out in last week. We will start moving, you know, we're raising $15 million in a fund to just get cash into people's hands that are living below the poverty line, that lost their jobs. And we're going to start moving out, you know, probably at a pace of, you know, millions of dollars a week. And, you know, those are things that just normally aren't done by government quickly. We've expanded from 5,000 meals for 5 meals a week for 5,000 seniors to over 12,000 seniors getting 10 meals a week, because we need them to stay at home and we need to make sure that they're getting fed. And these are folks that are living below the poverty line. And I would just say that, you know, just in this environment where people are hurting, quickly get the help out there, and also think long term.
Thank you so much for that, Matt. And so I'm going to do a couple quick rapid questions that are coming in from our audience so that they can get their voices in the room. And if just any one of you has an answer to it, we'll take that and then we'll move on to the next one. The first one being, what about community colleges? Are any of you leveraging relationships with, or the technology of, or your local community colleges in an interesting way?
This is Rosie. I will tell you, we've been very fortunate to have longstanding relationships with the community colleges in our area. Prince George's Community College, which is in Prince George's County, Maryland, right outside of Washington, D.C., very affluent African-American community, but also one that has a distinct need as well, with over 40,000 students. For the last 5 years, we've had what we call a financial empowerment center that is located on the campus of the college, where it's a one-stop shop for any kind of financial need that you may have. And what we found now, even though the college is closed and doing distance learning, we're now having our financial empowerment centers open, doing work virtually. And so it's everything from helping people understand how to access resources, people who are small businesses, how to access what the state is doing there. It's being able to understand where there may be utility assistance, budgeting and things of that nature. And so the community colleges for us has been phenomenal. And we're very fortunate to have a similar relationship with Northern Virginia Community College, where we also have veteran centers on the campuses of each of the colleges as well. And for us with the financial empowerment centers, it's been our 5-year effort, and we now have 5 of them located literally in DC, Maryland, as well as in Virginia. So the community colleges play an important role and being able to access the community, being able to share those services in a very trusted environment as well.
And that goes back to that same theme of that Peter brought up at the beginning. Those relationships that you've built over time can be easily activated. The trust is there. Did anyone else have something there? I'll move on to the next one. There was a question about how you track all of the resources. Tonio, you were mentioning that you've got this, you know, high-tech Google Doc, which I love, but also Is that for all of the funding that's flowing out into the region? I can't imagine. That would be hard to track, or maybe it is.
Right. Yeah.
I'm wondering if any of you have that in place. I know Candid is tracking some of this stuff.
Yeah, we have a. Go ahead. Sorry, Tony. Go ahead.
No, please. I'll just quickly answer. Ours is just for our philanthropic partners. We're not tracking local government flows or state and federal government, but just philanthropy. It's it's open source. So if you want to participate, you have the option to, and we're happy to share it widely. I saw that Brad asked if we could share the template. We'll make sure that that's available for sharing.
You're here.
Great. Matt.
Yeah, I mean, we're raising and spending money at an incredible clip. I have 2 finance calls a day, at least, sometimes more, but every morning and then every evening as well. And we track everything. We track money in, we track pledges, and then we track every dollar out. And then in each category, there's multiple categories where money's going out. There's someone who's obviously responsible for each of those programs. And so they're reporting back to us exactly what's happening in those categories. So we are definitely staying on top of that, and it's no small feat for sure, but it's super important also.
Yeah, a team of I don't know how many would need to be there to do that just for Los Angeles County. Well, I'm going to start the wrap up here, and I'm just going to ask each of you. I loved, I think it was Peter saying something about their superpower. And so I think I'll give you the opportunity either to talk about your partner's superpower or just give any final bit of advice or wisdom that you think that this audience would benefit from. So I'll start with Peter because he hasn't talked in a little bit.
Sure. Well, I would definitely say that the city superpower has been the leadership of Mayor Garcetti and the people he's brought on board, and the willingness of everybody to pull together. And I think we'll need to call on that more, both during the rest of this crisis and for the period after. I'd say the thing that's worrying me the most, or where I would give the public health response the lowest grade, has been testing. We need to get our act together on that. That's a national, but also a local issue. And we'll have another wave in the fall. So if we can all put our heads together now on how to be ready for that, it would be really helpful.
Who's next? I won't force you. I'll go just Tonio. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll say my superpower has been the ability to engage with an amazing team. My colleagues at the Community Foundation have been absolutely fantastic. We had to cancel a gala on March 13th and move right into COVID-19 response, and we've not missed a beat. So they've been on at a place where lots of people have been, maybe not as productive working from home. My team has been working around the clock, and so they've been the superpower and the glue, along with the team members of our peers in philanthropy. Like, we're working on this together. So it's not just the heads of our foundations; it's their team members as well, who are working in committee and in work groups together to try to problem solve together. So the power of partnership is also an important superpower that we have here at our disposal.
Thank you, Matt.
So I would say, all the success that I'm seeing that is going on across our city and county has really been rooted in a couple things. One, a great sense of collaboration, no ego. No, I haven't seen the kind of territorialness that you would normally see in these situations. Everybody's really about, how do I get the best result as quickly as possible? And there's an incredible amount of flexibility, not being wedded to the way things have traditionally been done, but understanding that this moment requires outside the box thinking and just a high degree of flexibility. And it's really the success we've had is not attributable. I mean, I do think our mayor, Eric Garcetti, has really set the right tone. And he has historically put the right people in place, but it's across not just the city, the county, all of the major philanthropic organizations. And we've also just had a tremendous response from our business community. And it's I'm sure in every community, in every city, they're hurting. They have tremendous pressures within their own businesses and their own employees. But at least in LA, I feel that we've had a real community of business leaders step up to the plate and really help to look out for the most vulnerable.
You're here, Rosie.
When I think about superpowers, I think for us it is the superpower is there are entities within Washington who really do work together. I think that people assume that everybody in Washington is at each other's throats, and I think that, you know, for us, I think the superpower is there is a collective group of people who care so deeply about community and what it means. And some of the brightest minds that you will ever find in this country who are able to bring that thought leadership to the table, that collectively, I don't believe that even in the midst of crisis and what looks dark, there is absolutely nothing that we can't do together. So I share with Tonia with not only this work, but the work of our teams, and we've talked about that of our colleagues, and not only those who serve the community in that part of the nonprofit sector, but also the funders who are part of that sector, that we really do genuinely experience partnership in an ongoing basis. And so for us, the superpower is that we continue to do this work, that it is indeed having the right impact, and that we're ready to take this to the next level. We will be here for the long haul, and we will get through this recovery and be ready to help and serve our neighbors.
You know, this has just been a beautiful conversation. Thank you to all of you. You know, I heard themes about trust, about putting the community and the need ahead of our own institutions and egos, as Matt put it. And also just a lot about changing the way that we do our work as grant makers in the moment, in ways that are more fully responsive to the needs, and particularly the needs of those who are most at risk and most vulnerable because they've long suffered from the disparities in our system. So thank you so much for being on this call. You know, one of the things that the council has been advancing on behalf of a group of funders is a pledge to make some of the kinds of changes that you all have talked about and that are so important to the organizations on the ground trying to do this work with the people who are most affected. So maybe consider taking a look at that on our website. We will also be sending out all the resources that were mentioned on this call, and be on the lookout for the next in this series, which is Thursday the 23rd, and it will be about the particular feedback that you can try to get from grantees and communities now without overburdening them, because we know that they have other more important pieces of work to do right now. So thank you very much for being with us, and stay safe.